So let me go ahead and do that. And then, so my goal for today is going to be to really learn more about these recommendations, to really get into a sense of what's coming next and a bigger picture of what Crash Committee is best at discussing everything that's coming up. And a celebration for me, it's actually a really nice day in Chicago, and I'm leaving my house today, so I'm really excited about that.
Oh, Amelia?
Yeah, hi, I'm Amelia Bismarck. I also apologize for missing last month's meeting. I was in DC with KQV, having a great visit with congressional champions. And let's see, my goal for today. So as we continue to work through our way through the recommendations, what we'd like to do today is tap your wisdom related to our governance and nominating sphere, which is very apropos because I'm actually grinding my way on through successive rounds of our nominating policy, and nominations are open right now. So I'd like to really loop the Crash Committee in on a little bit of what we've been doing in this space the last couple of years, because there's been a lot of movement, and then to look together at the recommendations, see where we stand on them all these years later, and what kind of feedback you have for the process, since it is in motion right now. It's a great opportunity to have direct influence. And my celebration is that right at the moment that my mom needed some help, the studio apartment next door to my house opened up in my neighbor's house for the first time in 6 years, and we're able to move her in, and she's doing well, and we're going to be able to support her, and we're figuring it out. It's just all kind of amazing. So there's a lot to celebrate with that. All right, so Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair.
Say yes. So we will now go into our community norms, and if I could get a volunteer to just take one and go around, and I'll have to call on people, whoever wants to go first.
I'll start. Everyone participates.
Thank you.
Speaks from your own experience.
Step up, step back. If when in racially mixed groups discussing race, you usually hold back, speak up. If when in racially mixed groups discussing race, you tend to speak often, take a pause.
Stay engaged and open to new learning. Listen well for deep understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Honor consent.
Honor concerns, ask for suggestions, no shaming, attacking, or discounting.
Experience any discomfort that comes up as part of the learning process. Speak your discomforts. Breathe.
Maintain confidentiality. If you later share about your experience in a meeting, refrain from using names.
And assume positive intent and take responsibility for impact. And I just want to make sure we all still feel good about our community norms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So here's our agenda for today. We got through the first two things, and we're going to move into governance, personnel, staff, and coalitions, as many as we can get through Crash recommendations, with time for reflection, wrap up and next steps, and then we'll be able to adjourn by 5:30.
Excellent. So Miriam, would you like me to share my screen?
Sure, that works.
Alrighty. So let me do a couple changes here. There we go. All right, are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so now let me make it big. All right. So last meeting, my understanding is you all looked at the membership area. Oh, and so one thing for y'all to know, when I'm in presenter mode, I can't see the chat. So you can, if there's something you need me to know,
I'll read them out.
Anything I need to know in order to help facilitate the conversation, let me know. Okay, so I guess there were a few people besides me that missed the last call, and I think that was the first time we dug into these recommendations. Maybe so, Sahira, would it be helpful? Is it needed at all to share a little bit about what these are, where they came from, and what we're trying to do, or has that already been covered?
So, so what we went through last time was some of the genesis of the membership, the crash committee recommendations on membership. What we came away with were the things that we thought needed to be highlighted this year as we proceed with our committee. And we came to the conclusion that regardless of why a certain recommendation was birthed, this is our committee at this point, and so if this is the direction that we feel we need to move in, it doesn't matter why. We just need to make things a little more measurable so that as we're moving forward, we know how we're doing and reaching the goals that we're setting for the committee. And we made it through all of membership. We knew it would take a while to get through them, so we went around, and I don't think we have. I think today is just me, you, and Miriam that might have some historical memory on some of these things, since the rest of our membership is newer. So we'll have fun.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, one of the things that I think is most profound about CRASH committee, and I think is distinct about diversity and equity committees that sometimes happen in organizations and institutions, is that you all are empowered to directly look at the structure, the function, the experience of USDC writ large, and to make recommendations like that directly translate into change. So I think that's pretty cool. This is the realm of looking at governance and nominating. So this is largely around the board and the process by which the board is selected. And I think the other thing that could be helpful to know is these recommendations came out of a process from 2014. So a lot has happened since then. And so there could easily be things that are either no longer relevant, like this one up here, looking at racial ethnic representation of coalition region representatives. That's a structure piece that doesn't even exist anymore. But also there could be things that just exist now and didn't even exist in 2014. So let's think about gaps too. Okay, so the first one is to update the current diversity statement to convey the organization value on inclusion. So this is an interesting, is it helpful if I just can give you a little perspective on each one? I don't want to be a dominant voice, but as Sahira said, I think there's just three of us that have been in this for a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Okay, so we have on the USDC website, we have what's called what we're titling at this point, the working definition of equity. And it's where we have, that view of the lens and the mirror and the outcome. I personally feel that serves us pretty well. And, I'd be interested to know, if most people on this committee are familiar with that, and or if there's maybe a discussion point is, are there advantages, disadvantages to calling it a working definition? Is it there some point we want to say, like, this is the organization's definition or statement, like something more affirmative? What comes up for me looking at this one? What about other people?
Can you pull up the website just so that, is that possible?
I think that's going to get bigger for me. Let's see here. Yeah. Are folks able to read that? It might be pretty tiny on your screen.
Hey, it's Sissy. Can you repeat the questions that you asked us?
Yeah, so the first recommendation in the governance realm is to update the current diversity statement to convey the organizational value on inclusion. And I think part of why that's here under governance and nominating is because within the nominating policy and then the board structure, we point to our definition of equity. And so it gave an opportunity actually to ask you all a question I've been wondering for a while, which just kind of a temperature check if calling this a working definition of equity, advantages or disadvantages from making that the title of it something like our statement or our definition rather than working definition. I could also argue working definition implies it's still a work in progress, which is alive.
Yeah, I've thought about that, the whole work in progress versus having it as our firm belief. Because if it's within because this is something that everyone sees, if there is a way that we within ourselves can say we can change it if we need to, and then, send it out, but having it just be like, this is our stance, I think gives people a clear direction and definition for themselves.
So I think I'm hearing your comment as like changing the title and the first words are working definition. You'd be in favor of making that something that's more affirmative, like a stance.
Yes, just because I think to me it gives people more of a good footing of saying like this is just what it is, and there's no flexibility in that.
This is Nandi. I agree with that. I think with definitions and work plans and all of those, organizations frequently revisit and edit. So I think, at that time, whatever it is, that we should be, firm in what our belief and our definition is, and just make sure we're intentional about visiting it, however often it needs to be visited, just to make sure that we're keeping up with, the change in times or, issues that need to be addressed.
Elise, Chad had a different perspective. Elise, you want to, I don't want to speak for you unless you can't.
I commented that I like working as a permanent name because it does imply the fluidity. We do keep on working on these things. So I like working because it implies that we're working on it. And that feels to me like an honest description of how equity work functions, that it doesn't feel as if there's a single landing point that we will land on and say, we're done, this is it. That hasn't been my experience. It doesn't feel as if we're ever done. It doesn't feel as if it's solved. It just feels as if we've reached a particular point on the journey. But that doesn't mean that it can't. Other people's points were very good ones. That to some extent, this is always the situation in any organizational work, and it should just be assumed that whatever we're putting up there is the latest, greatest.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on? I think for me, if there's a way to get a middle ground between, if anyone was having trouble hearing you, at least.
I'm sorry.
I do see the value in both. Making sure that it's clear that this is where we are, this is what we value. But yes, alluding to the point that we are not there, like our definition may change as we learn more, because it's a journey.
And that could perhaps go in, it doesn't necessarily have to say working definition in the title. Maybe there could be a sentence lower down saying this is a journey and we don't feel as if we're finished. Or something.
Can you repeat that? I can barely hear her.
I'm sorry, is this any better? I'm not sure how to increase my mic's output volume. Is this possible? Is this better?
A little.
How about this? So I'll try again. One possibility would be to, instead of having working in the title, have it be a sentence lower down in the description that just says, this is a work in progress, and we're not trying to say we're finished with the journey.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, it doesn't have to be in the title. Even if we want to indicate somewhere in there that it's a working, evolving set of principles and ideas, that doesn't have to be part of the title. People feel like that makes it sound too tentative and not like a firm principle. It certainly doesn't have to be in the title.
Great. Any other thoughts?
This is Isenwa. I guess I just want a little bit more clarity in regard to what the feeling is around needing or wanting the working part within this. I couldn't hear Elise's first comment, but I'm just wondering what the feeling is in regard to really wanting working to be a part of the diversity statement.
So Amelia, do you have any insight on the decision to put working in the definition?
I don't. Yeah, I think that part of it was that crash at the time. So again, this is 5 years ago. The lens and the mirror and the outcome was all pretty new. And so I think working definition really was like, here's where we're able to find consensus at this moment on the best way to describe this, but it's not like something that everyone like that was really assumed to be, we knew we were young in the journey. So it was a way of acknowledging all of that. And so that's also, I think, why this became the first recommendation here, is to make it something, that Crash looks at and that the board looks at, to say, like, let's really make sure we revisit that, the title and the language around it. And then within the, I think this also can relate to the nominating committee policy itself. So not just the organization writ large and the diversity statement, working definition on equity statement that we just looked at, but also within the board itself, making sure that inclusion is highlighted. And that's definitely been embedded into the fiber. Probably linking in, I could speak a lot more about the changes that have happened in nominating committee as also a segue into part 2. But I wonder if you got what you wanted and needed from that question.
Right. I guess for me, I would advocate for not having the working in the title or in the content in that sense. I think you can have a qualifier at the end. I think I heard that part of what Elise was saying. Because I would think having working or would give the impression or the sense of we're not strong in this stance or we're still unsure, when I don't think that's the case, right? I think we want to say that we understand there may be new tools or new lenses or new things that we would want to, that may inform our thinking later on, that may change some of the words, but the meaning behind what we're saying isn't going to necessarily change, if that makes sense. And so I think I would echo what I think a few others had said before in terms of not having that.
And for your sake, Amelia, I'll read the stuff that
Thank you.
Alicia's putting in the chat. So she typed, since it's hard to hear, her own personal feeling is that that all of this work is very much an ongoing project without a fixed, identifiable, now we're done endpoint. But that might not be a good reflection of how this should be presented on the website. She said she finds that sometimes people act as if there is an assignment to finish and then the promised land has been reached, which doesn't seem to actually work out in practice, like needing to move from just diversity to inclusion, for example. But even if it's useful to put that qualifier in, there's no need for it to go in the title. She agrees with the idea that it would be a pity to imply wishy-washiness.
Okay. Cool. So is it helpful to hear if I can we get to the second recommendation, speaking a little bit about the nominating committee process?
Yes.
All right. So there's been a lot underway in that realm, and the great changes that have already taken place have resulted in our current board, the youngest and most diverse board that we've ever had in USDC history. So it's really exciting and it's working very well. So the results of many years of good work. And also a couple of years of very concerted work, specifically on the nominating process. So there was a breakdown a couple of years ago that was of considerable concern, and it resulted in a board decision to have a ad hoc group that conducted a series of interviews with everyone involved who felt, harmed or impacted by what happened. And that resulted in producing a report of recommendations of changes to the nominating process. And then those recommendations went to the board, and they mapped through those recommendations against the current policy and made a lot of changes both to the policy and to the procedure. And so we ran that process through last year, and that's the reason why you may remember the board turnover didn't happen at the August meeting last summer the way it usually would. They changed over in October because you have to have the ballots out for 60 days before you have the changing of the guard, and it took a lot of time to get through all those processes and to get it right. So the board made a one-time decision to delay. And in that process, we learned even more. So now here we are, the second year in a row, we are again updating and continuing to refine the process and the policy. And at the same time, the open call for nominations is up. If you feel inclined, it's closing today. So we really hope that if you feel drawn towards board service or someone who would be great, please, by all means, nominate them today. We've had a fewer response than we would expect. So we really would love to see people, feel welcomed into that space. So on the one hand, this recommendation, we've taken care of this. We do monitor demographic composition, and we do actively nominate leaders of color for the USDC board positions. One of the things that's kind of an upgrade in the process is really going for the transparency about that. So in the board's process, they get the nominating process started by doing an assessment, looking at all of their own demographics and characteristics. So in addition to thinking about race, ethnicity, age, sex, profession, they also look at things like geography, special realms of expertise, where within the lactation field they have specialty, gender and sexual orientation, all those things. And then looking at who they are, they think about what it is that they want. So they go through a formal assessment process every year to really think about what are they missing and how do they want to grow. And for the first time last year, in the open call for nominations, they published that. So before, it was only the nominating committee that knew what it was that the board wanted to become. And now that's wide open. Like we would like to have younger people. We would like to have men. We would like to have in particular to maintain the racial and ethnic diversity, but also in particular to be reaching out to the Asian community. There's no representation there right now. So they make their desired characteristics, and for transparency's sake, everybody knows that as part of the open call process, so that you can, if you see yourself or you see a colleague, you can be inspired to jump in. Any questions about that? That's a lot of information, but there's just been so much movement in that space.
No questions or comments from me. I just wonder if anyone feels like this goal or recommendation is something that we can say, okay, we did that, or should it continue?
I think it should continue. It adds to when it's an open call, especially when it's that explicit, it helps to let people know there's inclusion, the opportunity for inclusion. And it doesn't have to be as small as just our breastfeeding world, the people that we all know each other across. And so sometimes you don't know who else may be out there that's willing to do the work. And it's nice that there's an opening for them to participate.
So actually, Dr. Young, you bring up a very compelling point. So right now, board service is limited to member reps. And so one of the things that means is that you end up with a board that always has people who are tied tightly to breastfeeding organizations. And one of the questions and conversations that kind of cycles around is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of that, right? From, when I look at it, like, gosh, if we had a board that was, a lawyer and an accountant and, a media person, like professionals in all those different realms, like we would really change, right, who's on our board. But USDC board has always been, people that come from Lactasia, if you will. And then one of the advantages and disadvantages of that is that one of the things that has happened over time is a shift of, credential shifts, right? So there's been times where I think everyone on the board was IBCLC. There's moving more now towards a board that has pretty good representation across the lactation support provider types. But I think about that a lot, actually, that requirement that nominations are limited to member reps both gives us things and costs us things. So it's not really an open call in quite the way you were thinking.
Right, open within limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And Elise typed in, she agrees with what Michael said. So yes, continue to work on that one.
Yeah, we can.
Any other comments about that before we move to number 3?
If I may, there's one thing that might be added here, if you want. So one of the changes that just happened last week is that in addition to setting description about how to do inclusion on the board, we also created, just this last week, a requirement about the composition of the nominating committee itself. And that was kind of came out of lessons learned last time. So where it's at, they increased from 5 to 7 the number of people that can be on the nominating committee, and they added that one of those. Let's see, it feels like I'm forgetting somebody. So it's 7, but 6 are voting because one is the board liaison, one is the crash committee liaison, and that person is voting. One is the chair of the nominating committee that's appointed by the board chair. And then the others, the nominating committee chair appoints. So, and of those, we said of the 6 voting members, at least 3 need to be from communities of color. So it's a couple things that are interesting about that. It's the first place that I know of that we set a real like limit or quota of like this is the minimum that must be met, and so that was kind of new. I think really important and really good. But I could see adding something here that says that in addition to monitoring and encouraging this here, that in addition to the board, it's also the nominating committee who helps to create the conditions for the board to be chosen.
Right, and I wonder, as you said it, if that should be its own separate goal.
Voting members. Now, this is another thing, and there's still time for you all to influence this, because I'm writing the policy right now, and the board's voting on it on Tuesday. So again, this is the first time we had like a number that was stated, like it must be at least 3, and then also we've gone kind of round the bend if it's best to say from communities of color or like from underrepresented communities, or say people of color, like what would be, it's a little bit different than things we've done other places. So what would be your recommendation?
Anyone have thoughts?
Hi, it's Chanel. Just it's like I was trying to like go over it in my head. But I definitely can see where you're coming from with that, Amelia, because maybe on the one side, when we say communities of color, some that may not identify as
right.
a community of color, but are still, part of a, underrepresented community, may feel, they don't fit in with that. So maybe a way to maybe merge the two, or, if it would be, okay enough to say, those that identify as you being part of the underrepresented underrepresented community. Maybe that would, a better fit, maybe.
Right, so it could be identifying as people of color. It could be identify. I mean, because I think self-identification is a pretty important.
What if it was?
And that, because we talk a lot about what does community mean, and you're totally right, Chanel.
What if it was read identifying as people of color from underrepresented communities? Would that get in the different pieces? Or as people from underrepresented communities of color? That's just a little quibble. I don't know which one is better. I'm just putting them out there.
Right, and in particular, I want to make sure, do you all want it specifically to be like an of color, the racial identifier, so it's not just that one person is LGBTQI or so on.
And that was I'm stuck on that because like there's so many underrepresented groups
right
in
and
USBC
so, yeah.
leadership that or historically have been that to just single out racial diversity to me doesn't kind of get at the true what we want. Yes, we need racial diversity and we also need other inclusive.
Yeah, so just that being inclusive, like truly being inclusive and making sure, you know, each one is really, you know, representing that.
Another question, and this is just a question, it's not necessarily helpful, but presumably the goal is to have people from several different groups rather than say 3 of 6 all forming a single block, as it were. And I don't know if there's any way to address that without getting really clunky.
Right, because also these are 3-year staggered terms. So already in order to meet this 3 of 6, there's delicate conversations asking people to step aside and make room before their terms were up, which is fine. But you could set yourself up, if you got real specific, you could set yourself up for frequently having to ask people to leave in order to balance the group at any given time.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a good committee to have 1-year terms because it creates this hellish thing to like find and recruit the people when you already have to find and recruit the board. But 2, it's a group that really benefits from having some, you know, working knowledge of the process to help hold it from year to year.
Right. It usually takes at least the first year to figure out
what you're doing, how it works. Yeah. Right. The other thing is there's a real vision to have the nominating committee also not just have this real short-term intense time of like interviewing people, but to actually really become invested in leadership development, where they're there when they're recognizing like, oh man, here is this just shining star, and with some support, like she'd be great for the board in a couple of years. And so if you have people on the nominating committee who can help nurture that process, you know, can mentor people into board service, that also seems optimal.
And so at least chatted, what about requirement of at least 3 of 6 voting members identifying as members of at least 2 underrepresented communities?
Not each.
I'm curious as to where the 3 of the 6 came from. Was that an arbitrary number? Where does that come from in terms of wanting at least half?
Our board chair.
Board chair, okay.
And it gave me pause only because I was like, oh, we haven't approached it that way. We haven't approached like a number in any other space. And I mean, I'm not opposed to it. It's just anytime we do something new, you want to take a pause because we set precedent, you know, and just say like, oh, are there any unintended consequences of doing that? And how does that work?
That was exactly what I was going to say. I understand. I think I understand the need and want to ensure that there is representation by putting the numbers in. But I do think there may be some unintended consequences to think about. And you've named some in terms of other folks have to come off, which I don't think that's a negative or a positive unintended consequence. But also there may be undue pressure on individuals or communities of color that may not have the resources to be on committees and the time And so you may have to go to the same people over and over again. Just want to think about that in the sense of, we definitely want we want to be more inclusive, but also it's time intensive to be on committees. And some folks, even if they want to, may not have the time or the resources. And so thinking about that as well in terms of how do we make an environment where people can serve and be supported. And it's not just an arbitrary number, but what other things are going on or being put in place to support these requirements.
Mm-hmm. And in a way that almost argues well for the other side of this, which is this is a committee where you can have a big impact in a very short amount of time. You come in, you work for like 8 weeks and kind of done. So it has been nice the way it's been rolling out without the mentorship kind of model. It's been kind of nice that way, I think.
Did you want the rest of the wording that Elise suggested for that other part?
Yeah, thanks.
Identifying as members of at least 2 underrepresented communities.
Oh yeah, I think it looks like I started to do it. Thank you. Identifying as members of at least 2 underrepresented communities. Yeah, could you tell me more about how that would, what that would get at for you?
I was suggesting the at least 2 part because it seemed as if it might avoid the possibility that 3 people would all represent exactly the same community, which actually wouldn't necessarily increase the diversity all that well. But as you pointed out, if you're trying to say that all 3 people have to be from different underrepresented communities, then that gets unworkable.
Potentially, yeah.
Logistically very challenging.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, maybe the at least 2 thing does have the same effect. Maybe that also makes it too challenging logistically. I just wanted to put it out there as a possible halfway point.
I like it because it creates inclusion within the inclusion.
Layered inclusion.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw your other part. It uses members twice. I'm a former literature major. Yes, I have trouble with 2 members.
Voting members identifying as components of, as belonging to. I like belonging to.
And I like adding self to identifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've definitely had the last 2 boards. We had women who self-identified in ways that people, that wasn't obvious, and that people even serving on the board for a few years didn't know until a little while in. So that self-identification piece is really important.
And there's a potential misreading here, which would be unfortunate. The potential misreading is that each of those people has to belong to at least 2 different underrepresented communities. I don't want to get
that is how I was reading it, and that's why I was like, wow, how would that work?
Yeah, okay.
That's how it's reading right now. I would be concerned about that.
And really what I meant was, of those 3 people, the 3 of them might be best if they came from 2 different groups rather than all 3 coming from the same group.
Diversity within the diversity. They aim to have, several racial, ethnic, I don't want to say orientations, origins, bodies represented. Several racial, ethnic groups. How about that?
I may be the only one, but this is becoming really convoluted to me. I think, in my opinion, you could just say if you could, 3 of the 6 voting members self-identifying as belonging to underrepresented communities or underrepresented communities, because I think that term, which someone said earlier, is very inclusive.
Okay. So that's how that would look.
I think it's good.
No, I don't. Yeah, and I think, we can wordsmith if needed.
But this is good. I mean, it gives me some to bring back to the board on Tuesday when they're looking at the policy. So thank you.
Right, and I think as long as you capture the intent, the words can be the words can be worked. But we have at this point 30 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get through.
Yeah. Okay, so number 4 is concrete, measurable, time-bound goals for increased representation in priority demographics. So I know for sure if Kinkini was here, she would say, better outreach is needed, AAPI, and also we just need better data about those breastfeeding rates from those communities as well. So that like external big lens and the internal lens. I don't believe we have not met this. We've not set. This could probably be a whole conversation in and of itself, looking at what we know about representation right now and where we want to go. Would it work for the purposes of time? Would it work to flag this as an area that really could use some work this year?
And I think this ties back to the last meeting, doing a better job defining what the priority demographics are.
Also, I'm a little, you said increased representation, and I actually don't know what that means. Does it mean, you said something about breastfeeding rates in the priority demographics, but increased representation didn't say that to me. It said increased representation of priority. I'm confused. I don't know what increased representation means here.
I think here, because we're in the governance and nominating section, I think in part there's a goal for USBC to get really clear about what are the measurable goals to increase representation, in this case on the board, but also across USBC writ large. Right, so we want to be, when we started this in 2014, we hadn't even been tracking demographics of anyone in our network or member organizations or any of that. So there's been a real effort to let's build the data so that we know who's here. And then let's, as Crash Committee, look at where do we recognize we need to be growing so that we have better representation. So then my reference to AAPI was saying we know that that's an area that we need to do a better job, and partners at CDC on the big data also need to do a better job. Is that helpful?
Yes. And flagging it for a longer conversation sounds like a great plan.
Okay, cool. All right, so elicit periodic feedback to assess how USBC culture is perceived, external perceptions of the board or organization, internal perceptions among board members on staff. So I think this has been part of a conversation too about the desire to have an equity audit. There should be a big opportunity for that.
And is this anything that we've actually done since the goal was set?
So we get at this in part with things like the conference and other evaluations, where it's also asking, like, did this feel like a welcoming environment, and what kind of feedback do you have? So some of that, yes, but definitely, especially 5 years here into really building out the lens and mirror, having something much more concerted and maybe formal seems timely.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be a good time point. Like, it's been 5 years since this stuff started.
Mm-hmm. And this summer we'll be writing our proposal for the next arc of Kellogg funding. And this is a big part of what we've already been telling them we really want to do, that, Crash wants to do this, the board really feels this is important. So we'll be looking to, actually have it supported, like to be able to have consultants come in, really, help hold and carry that process, so that we have, assistance about it if we need it. Okay, so the next one, number 6. Integrate awareness of diversity and inclusion into all USBC policies, programs, and activities to truly transform the organization.
How do you feel in the 5 years you've been doing in progress then? And Elise said that one, number 6, sounds absolutely central to me.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any way to like get a sense for how we've done?
Well, I think that will be part of the equity audit for sure. One of the things that would have been so cool to do all along is like track the different ways, just like right now the nominating policy is changing. Like if we had kept a repository of saying like, and now this policy changed, and this practice changed, this program shifted. Maybe we can do some of that retroactively.
All right, Elise said it's another one that needs to be made measurable. And I think that's what we were both just getting at, like, how do we know when this goal is accomplished? Or that we're making any progress towards it. Okay, any other thoughts before we go to number 7? All right, so number 7 is set goals to identify and address non-inclusionary policies, behaviors, and dynamics. That's another one that I don't know how you would measure. Anyone else have thoughts?
I agree, but it does say set goals, which sort of looks like the project is to figure out how to measure it.
It seems like it could also fall under the line of an equity audit with the policies.
The other thing that comes up for me is, we have this concept of the host committee. So some of you have asked, stated the desire to know a little bit more what's expected at the coalition. part of that is, the hope that board and staff and crash committee and conference program committee are all ready to be able to support and hold the space. And so each year we've had a training. I think on the staff perspective, we haven't always gotten what we really are looking for, which is how to interrupt in real time and how to support in real time. So we've been doing our best and bringing our best, but I could see one goal in here to really like create what is the USCC like approach to really creating and holding a space that has accountability and is safe enough and brave enough and welcoming.
Cool. Any other thoughts? So number 8 is build, grow, and support a viable board mentoring culture with a concrete plan to determine how to pair mentors and mentees, and when necessary, look outside the organization for mentors. Does that culture exist, you think?
No, they set up a mentoring program a few years ago. So a mentor is matched with a mentee. But I know last year not ended up happening with that on the board. And then this year, so they set more clear expectation that the mentee and mentor would meet at least once a month, separate from the board meeting, to check in with each other. And I'm not clear how that's gone. We do have a whole evaluation. So I guess that's the other thing is, so when we look at setting goals, number 7, there is, when did that start? I think in 2017, I'll check on that, launched, a board inclusionary dynamics survey that is assessed annually. So they did do that. So we've got a couple years of data. And I think the inclusionary dynamics survey includes a mentoring question. I'll check on the data set as well.
I think it's important to evaluate both the mentor and the mentee. Maybe with different questions, but
yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments on number 8? All right, number 9, conflict resolution guidelines with a question mark. That was my first question, is why is there a question mark?
Yeah, I don't know. So the board does not have conflict resolution guidelines in place at this time.
Okay. So maybe the question was whether or not they were needed?
Yeah, are they needed?
I mean, like this year things are lovely, but yes, I think things come up, yes, I think it could be helpful. One thing that has been done is the creation of an ethics committee that, is an ad hoc or as needed committee. So we did codify how that comes into place if it's called for. So one thing we could look at, is that sufficient? We do have examples from other places, in the USCC sphere where we have spent a lot of time developing conflict resolution guidelines. I'm sure others exist as well that we could look at importing.
All right, I'm coming. I'm going to leave you guys.
It might be good, especially if it's a good time on the board. This might be the best time to put some guidelines in place.
Yeah, exactly. I think now would be a really great time to do so, to look at maybe, as you mentioned, Amelia, in other areas where they've already been created and seeing how they could be maybe adapted to this, because you would hate to not have anything in place or at least something to go to, and then there is an issue, and then having to try and figure out what to do then would be harder.
Right. Right. And it means facilitators is what it has meant. So, and then that means money, and that means things fester if there's not the money and all of that. So, yeah, I'm glad we surfaced an opportunity.
All right, so how does everybody feel about them? Want to make sure we have time for reflection and getting to next steps. So we made it through another section. How does everybody feel about what we've... Any pressing thoughts, comments? All right, so we'll
Am I the only one on camera?
You are.
You guys.
Yes.
Lovely bookshelf.
Wait, yeah, watching me read. All right.
All right, so time for us to check in. So we don't have to go through every one of these reflection questions, and I'll just go based on who's in or on my screen right now. So one thing you learned, one thing that you saw or heard that surprised you, what stood out, one action item you'll do, your gift, your wish, or how you feel. And we'll start with Nandi is first on my screen.
Was not expecting that when I was looking through the list. Let's see.
That was your surprise, right?
It was my surprise, absolutely. I think one thing that I will do is I want to think about, I just went blank, the equity audit that we referred to a couple of times. I want to think through that and see what kind of suggestions I can come up with for the organization. That's my action and my gift.
Thank you. All right, next on my list is Miriam.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna do how I feel. I feel that I really like these meetings just because I get to hear a lot about what everyone thinks and the differences in opinions and wordings and words and how they mean and how they work and how they affect the USBC. So that's always really, really good feeling. And an action item I will do is really, now that we've gone through two sections, I think it's really important to see and to kind of organize our brains around what the next three sections will kind of require for us. So I think that's a little bit of what I'm going to do.
Thank you. Next up is Amelia.
What stood out to me is just again, what an incredible resource the Crash Committee is. I'm just really grateful to be able to step out of the work and bandy about these things conceptually and check in on our progress and make sure we're moving forward. And this is just an incredible committee. So thank you all for service.
Thanks, Amelia. Next on my list is Elise.
Unmute myself here. I've been packing, but listening and attending. So that's why I'm not pictured. You don't want to watch me walking around the house trying to dig things out of the refrigerator to put in the car. But one of the things that really stood out for me was how effective the work has been at changing the board and the nominating committee. I was really impressed to hear how much really concrete change has apparently happened in the last few years that I had not known about. So that really stood out. Something that I will do is I'm going to go follow that link. Miriam, thank you. I'm a complete wuss about that kind of thing. So having it handed to me like that is very helpful.
Thanks, Elise. Next is Afenwa.
Thank you. I would echo what Elise said in terms of what stood out, being my first year on the Crash and just going through this process has really highlighted the importance of the committee and the input and feedback and how it is then used to really change the course of the USBC, but also helps to stand as a role model or really representation for other organizations in terms of how to do this work and how to do it thoughtfully and critically. And so that's something that really stood out. Just the amount of time we took to go through the different points to make sure things were said correctly. And really thinking about how they could be interpreted or the unintended consequences was really important. And one thing I will do is really think about individuals who could be on the nominating committee and or apply for the board, and think of folks who may not think of themselves in those positions, but have great potential to do really great work. So that is something I will do.
Thank you. Next is Chanel.
Oh my goodness, like I have to just pick one?
No, you can pick more than one. You don't have to do all, though. I didn't want anyone to feel pressured to do all 7.
I mean, just overall, and I feel like I'm definitely echoing the sentiments of our amazing committee. Just really grateful to be part of the process. And, I'm learning, still learning so much. This is technically only my second, meaning because unfortunately I wasn't able to make the last. But just, it always stands out to me more and more the more I, dig into, learning about Crash and, and USBC as a whole. But just having that understanding and really being able to see and be a part of, this intentional impact that we really do have. And it's an honor, and it's, again, very humbling, to be a part of this process. And, one action, has just really become even more familiar with, the different components of USBC and just have a better understanding, of USBC as a whole. And then, of course, just dig in, as much as I possibly can with Crash and just be, as present as I can be and just, be available to, whatever is needed and expected of me.
Thank you. And then I'm last on the list. So one thing that stood out to me was just the importance of the language that we use, the amount of time that we spent that I felt was necessary in going through the working definition and whether or not to use working just really highlighted to me the importance of the intentionality of the words that we're choosing to represent the organization and ourselves with this crash. One action item for me that I think Amelia and Michael reminded me of is the fact that the nominations can only come from member organizations, and the DC Breastfeeding Coalition has not completed its member organization application yet. So
you can do both today, Sahara.
Well, I gotta find the 4 reps. Look, so I was waiting for people to email me, and I only got 1 response. So, and trying to share the load has been my, but you know, I see people who are definitely capable of being put in positions to help lead, but it won't be possible if we all join. So that's my to-do, is find my 4 or at least 2, and then submit our application. And yes, we'll get it done before the deadline of the 31st. All right, and I'm not sure if there are more slides. Like I said, this is my first day back from vacation, so thank you guys for being very active participants. So just a reminder about our workspace. There's going to be a link to the recording, and the minutes from our meeting today will go here on our workspace. So if you have any trouble getting in, I'm sure any of the staff at USBC would be more than happy to help. Miriam, Kenny, Danae, and I'm blanking on somebody, Amelia, and everyone else whose names are not going to come back because it's my first day back from vacation.
It's all right. Any of us. You can also always just write office at USBC. We'll get it somewhere. Get you right you need.
And then thank you everyone for attending. I'm not sure if there are more slides, but thanks also to everyone that has been involved with the process of getting the awards reviewed, and Liz is representing us on the nominations committee. So our work ends with this meeting, but it doesn't end when the meeting ends. So thanks for all your hard work and making sure that we're doing a great job being a crash committee. And our next meeting is in 3 weeks, if I recall correctly. This is our short gap. So you should have already gotten calendar invitations. You'll get lots of reminders, so have no fear. We won't let you miss it. And have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Safe travels, Elise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.